4, 3, 2, 1. We are live. Coming to you live. It's been live. Say what's up to the people, Dad.
Hey, good to have you listening at this extraordinary time, a week before the new administration is about to take over. And there's a lot going on today. You know, finally, after an unconscionable delay from Judge Cannon in Florida, who's done everything in her power to keep Trump from being held accountable for anything, the special counsel Jack Smith report on the January 6th indictment has finally dropped, although we're not yet going to see the report on the national security indictments. A lot of other things going on, important Supreme Court decision, the beginning of hearings on Trump's appointees, and further news about the California fires and the Republican responses.
Absolutely. Let's start with our big headline tonight, which is the Jack Smith report dropping. Interestingly, it's kind of getting buried under, like you said, the Hegseth nomination, the California fires, which is kind of crazy because it essentially says that the evidence was robust enough to convict Donald Trump.
Yes.
And yet it is being buried. I think one of the big issues we discussed is that it doesn't really say anything new.
That's correct. And he makes it clear, and I entirely agree with him, as does most independent analysts, that the evidence is clear that Donald Trump likely committed serious crimes to impede the peaceful transfer of power for the first time in the history of the Republic. And by the way, even now, so many years later, he still has not admitted that he actually lost the 2020 election, which is absurd, given that every analyst who's looked at, including the responsible parties within Trump's own administration, his loyalist Attorney General William Barr, his cyber security agency, both agreed that the notion that the election was stolen is absolute nonsense, which of course is further refuted by what happened in 2024 when Trump wins and all of a sudden all those allegations of election fraud go where, Sam? Whoop, up in the sky. You know, what happened? Suddenly the Democrats forgot to cheat, even though they had so drastically cheated in 2020. You know, we are entering truly a period of the theater of the absurd, or George Orwell's doublethink, you know, where famine is plenty, war is peace, hate is love. It's just extraordinary what's happening here. Now, Jack Smith, in addition to indicating that he thinks the evidence clearly would point to a conviction, also made a couple of other important points.
What are they?
Number one, he noted all of the efforts of Donald Trump and his associates to delay, to deflect, to distract from the substance of this indictment. And he pointed out that all of these efforts, you know, in multiple ways, not once did they refute any of the facts. These were all efforts that had nothing to do with the substance of the indictment, but simply trying to deny justice through justice delayed. And he made the point that this, in fact, succeeded. Once again, as was true of Donald Trump in his entire career, ever since the Justice Department found that he was violating the Fair Housing Act by discriminating against minorities in his real estate company back in the 1970s, he's never experienced real accountability for anything that he's done. Yes, some fines have stacked up against him, but in the scheme of things, given his wealth, those fines are not of great significance. But I would note, in support of what Jack Smith has said. Every time Donald Trump has gone in front of a jury, whether criminal or civil, what's been the result?
Guilty.
Guilty or civilly liable. This was true of the trial of election and tax fraud by fraudulently manipulating business records. It's true of the civil case where he was found to have sexually abused, hurt, and defamed E. Jean Carroll. It was true of the financial fraud case where he was found to have committed massive financial fraud. That, of course, was in front of a judge because he declined to go before a jury.
You've gone through this stuff a trillion times. Let's focus on Jack Smith right now.
All right. Jack Smith says there are two reasons why Trump was never held accountable. Number one, the Supreme Court.
Right.
Number two, he won the election.
Yeah.
But he misses...
tied. Those two reasons are also tied together.
Right, but he misses the most important reason, and it's understandable because it involves his boss, Merrick Garland, who delayed for almost 2 years before appointing a special counsel in November 2022, and he didn't really start his work until 2023, 2 years after the insurrection.
Can I say something in defense of Merrick Garland for a second?
Go right ahead.
Because everything in this Jack Smith report, everybody's already known, would it have really made any difference? I know you always say it's got to be on paper, it's got to be this, it's got to be all that.
It would have made one difference. All of this would have come down a year or a year and a half earlier. So all of the delays...
Right, but we knew all this stuff already. He's not publishing anything new. And even though Trump's been held to the fire in the E. Jean Carroll case, in the New York hush money trial, it didn't seem to make a difference.
But this would have been different.
Why? I don't get why.
Because these are much more serious charges than...
But they're charges that
let me finish.
Everybody knew already.
That's the point. We knew the basics of Donald Trump's illegal action shortly after January 6, 2021.
Right.
In fact, most of what's in the Jack Smith report is in my 2021 book.
Right.
13 Cracks Repairing American Democracy After Trump. So here's my point. If Merrick Garland had acted immediately, like he should, Donald Trump would have been put on trial for these very serious January 6 charges before a very, very aggressive judge who wasn't going to take any nonsense, Judge Chutkan in New York, from Donald Trump, and likely would have sentenced him to prison. And that would have made a fundamental difference in the political history of the country. As you've heard me say many times, it's not just the evil people who wreak havoc on this world. It's the good people who don't do enough to stop them. And Merrick Garland, who's a friend of mine who I've known for 60 years.
You always say that.
Right. So it's not that I have any animus against him. It's an objective analysis of what the guy failed to do and its enormous consequences for our society, for our democracy, and really for the world. And it's an important lesson. You know, as we move into this new administration, it's a very important lesson that the good people can't simply fold up, give in, and let Donald Trump do what he
So your case is that he might have been in jail.
I think he would have been in jail. I think he would have been in jail a year before the election, and everything would have been different. Absolutely right. I can't prove that, as you know. It's a hypothetical.
Yeah.
But I think it is very, very likely that that would have happened.
I see what you're saying, yeah.
Yeah. Now, as I said, at this point, it's buried. It's of no great consequence.
I checked CNN earlier today, and the Hegseth nomination and the wildfires were ahead of the Jack Smith report on their website.
And, of course, Judge Cannon did her duty in protecting Donald Trump like she has from the beginning of this trial, delaying it. it may have had some significance. I don't know. That's too hazy a hypothetical to opine on if it had come out before the election. I tend to think not, but who knows? It would have been a lot more important, let's put it that way, if it had come out a month ago, or rather 2 months ago or 3 months ago, rather than after the election, where, as you say, it's just absolutely getting lost.
Right. It seems like the main thing this did, at least for me, is just reinforce my weekly conundrum of, like, how the hell did the American people elect this guy? I mean, we're talking about a fake slate of electors. We're talking about influencing the DOJ. We're talking about January 6th. We're talking, all this
pressuring legislatures and officials.
Right.
It's like 4 or 5 separate, and all of this, after he did what was legitimate, go to the courts. And he lost every single significant case, almost 60 cases. He lost. It should have been over, but he engaged in multiple illegal actions to try to seize the election, not for any principle, not for any high policy, but simply to preserve his own political power.
Yeah.
It's the worst scandal by far in all of American history. But, at this point, it's a matter for the history books, not a matter that's going to influence what's going on in today's politics. As your brilliant mom always points out, Donald Trump has no shame.
No,
it doesn't matter what anyone says about him. It has no impact on him whatsoever. He's going to do whatever he thinks is best for Donald Trump, no matter what.
Renee Rendor says, I'm nauseated all over again.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I feel.
That's a pretty good one-sentence summary of it. Now, Hegseth, the most unqualified nominee in history to be Secretary of Defense. No leadership experience. The only time he tried to run anything was some charity which he completely botched. He has allegations of sexual harassment, has a drinking problem, had terrible things to say about the role of women in the military. And you know what?
What?
He's going to sail through.
Yeah, it's funny because on my post shows, people would come in and say, what about, Collins? What about Mitt Romney? They're not going to vote for this guy. And I say, every time this comes up, we always think Susan Collins is going to save us. Mitt Romney's going to save us. And guess what? They never do.
Susan Collins is always concerned, right?
Yeah, always concerned.
Always concerned. But then when push comes to shove, she's nowhere to be found. And I think that's going to be the case. All of the hard questions to Hegseth came from the Democrats. There was no hard questions coming from the Republicans, and in fact, Republicans stepped up to try to defend him. And of course, he used the old Donald Trump defense, right? They're all out to get me.
Right.
I never did anything wrong.
Right.
It's my enemies that have brought all that up, which is utter nonsense, because he was a nobody when all of these allegations came to the fore. It wasn't as if, like Donald Trump, he was a prominent figure that anyone would be interested in undermining or demeaning. He was just an ordinary citizen. And by the way, it looks like Donald Trump put his thumb on the FBI investigation, which, like he did with Brett Kavanaugh. It was totally inadequate. They didn't even interview his ex-wives, who obviously had a lot to say about Pete Hegseth. It was a totally incompetent, limited, incomplete investigation. And, I wonder if any of these Trump nominees are going to go down. Because you say,
no shot.
When push comes to shove, they're always willing to be shoved in any direction that Donald Trump wants them.
I bet every Trump nominee gets every Republican vote. That's my prediction for.
I don't think it's going to be quite that way.
You don't think so?
No.
I just saw something that said, I forgot if it was Collins or Murkowski already saying they're probably, I forget which one.
They're all going to vote for Hegseth, but it's questionable whether they're all going to vote for RFK Jr.
Yeah, maybe.
It's a little questionable whether they'll all vote for Tulsi Gabbard.
Yeah.
But, I don't think there'll be enough defections to override any of these
they're all going to get in.
They're all going to get in.
My prediction, honestly, is that they're all going to get full Republican support.
And by the way, as I've said many times, what anyone says in a confirmation hearing is irrelevant. It makes no difference because once they're confirmed, they can go off and do anything they want. I'll never forget, so many decades ago, Clarence Thomas pledging that I will be a moderate. I'm not going to be on the extreme. And, of course, he turns out to be one of the most extremist Supreme Court judges in history. Kavanaugh gave no indication he was interested in overturning Roe versus Wade, and of course jumped on that bandwagon. We can go on and on. Confirmation conversions mean nothing. You got to look at someone's actual record, not what they say in confirmation. A couple of other...
Wait, I want to say something really quick.
Yeah.
I forgot which senator said this, but I heard some senator today saying that Hegseth wouldn't even get a high-up position internally within the Army based on his background. But just because of politics, he's now leading the Army, which he wouldn't have even been eligible to lead internally.
Much less lead the Army, get even a leadership position within the Army.
If he was to apply for a high-level position within the Army, he would have been rejected immediately.
It would have been laughable, exactly. He would have been rejected.
But now he's leading the entire armed forces, all because of politics. It's pretty sad.
It's really sad. And remember, people forget, what did Trump say about the kind of people he was going to appoint? Only the best people.
Right.
What a joke.
Right.
Now, it was bad enough that the Republicans politicized the tragedy of the LA fires, which we are witnessing firsthand.
But we are safe.
We are safe, so don't worry about us, at least for the moment. And I think we'll be safe for the near future. It was horrible, awful that they politicized this with a bunch of lies, like he didn't sign some non-existent water conservation declaration, or his trying to protect an endangered species, didn't give them enough water, or they didn't have planes to fly. Just a whole series of fabrications trying to blame Democrats and to politicize this tragedy. Absolutely reprehensible. Now they've followed that up by further politicizing it. Speaker Johnson saying we might want to put conditions on aid to California. Never mind.
That's real? That's actually real?
That's actually real. I know it's hard to believe that they're not simply saying we're going to do everything possible to alleviate this tragedy and try to help the people whose lives were so horribly disrupted. That's what any honorable leader would say. But instead, they want to further politicize a human tragedy, even long before we have any idea what the causes were, what the response could have been any better. We don't know. Before they know anything, they put out a pack of lies, and then they try to further politicize it by saying we want to put conditions on the aid. Can you imagine?
But what are we
let me finish.
Okay.
Can you imagine the hue and cry you would have gotten from Republicans if Democrats had said, we're going to put conditions on aid to Florida after the hurricanes? Right. Can you imagine?
But the issue is they can say and do whatever the hell they want.
That's the tragedy.
They won the House. They keep winning elections. Their feet never get held to the fire.
I know.
It's frustrating.
Look,
and it's like, I think it's good to call them out, obviously, but it's like, it gets exhausting because nothing we say or do seems to matter because they just do and say whatever. They can lie as much as they want.
What we say and do does matter. And as I said, the good people of the world can't just put their head in the sands and fold and give up. That's what's happened in nation after nation that has become caught in the grip of authoritarianism.
Right.
As I said, the good people of the world have to act as futile and as difficult as it may seem.
Right. Sometimes
you
it
can't
feels
give
like
up.
punching with my eyes closed into
I know.
a dark room. It's just like I'm just wearing my energy thin for no reason because, again, they just keep winning elections. They keep saying whatever they want, lying.
Well, they haven't won all the elections. Let's put it, they didn't win in 2020.
Right.
They didn't win in 2018. They fell well short in 2022. They didn't win the special or the off-year elections. There are some bright spots in the election. Virtually every swing state, even though it went to Trump, has a Democratic governor. Even North Carolina has a Democratic governor. Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin all have Democratic governors. So there is something of a silver lining, as dark as the situation may seem. And I'm going to end on a positive note.
Let's hear it, Dad.
Supreme Court just did a terrific thing. Imagine that.
What?
Yes. It rejected a petition from the state of Utah to seize half of the federal lands, which are enormous in Utah. They're like twice the size of the state of California. And they wanted to seize half of it. And the problem with the state seizing it is you're going to lose the protections. They're going to privatize it. They're going to develop it. They're going to drill. They're going to dig. They're going to graze. And not only will this destroy pristine wilderness, which is so precious, but it will also contribute to catastrophic climate change, which, by the way, all of these Republican critics of what has happened in California won't admit for 1 second that global warming and the corresponding climate change was what created the conditions,
right,
the drought, the heat, the dryness for these fires once the wind picks up. And the truth is, there's not much anyone could have done to stop that. This is, fundamental changes in the environment, just like the hurricanes or the tornadoes or the floods. They're beyond human capacity to stop in advance because of the way nature has changed.
It's like saying Voldemort in Harry Potter. They literally cannot say the word climate change or they'll
they cannot
spontaneously combust.
Yeah.
But you're saying that's good news that the Supreme Court blocked.
Very good news that the Supreme Court preserved, at least for now, these precious wilderness areas in the state of Utah. So there is some good news, some positive things that are taking place.
A lot of young people my age are upset because the Supreme Court just upheld and they're going to ban TikTok in the United States.
Yeah, you're more expert on that than I am.
Yeah, I would say if the government is worried about our data and our national security, they should make overarching laws about our data and our information because Meta sells all of our information.
Of course.
I'm not sure about this, but they might even sell our information to companies that just hand it right over to the Chinese
It's very likely.
Party,
and and what are the chances you're going to get any regulations out of the Republican Congress and the Trump administration?
Right.
Zero. It's not going to happen. They're even undermining net neutrality, right?
Yes.
And that's important. Can you explain that?
I'm not prepared to explain that. I mean, I have an understanding of it, but I'm not prepared to explain
as I understand it, again, I'm no expert on this, once you undermine net neutrality, the big companies can then charge for the use of their services.
Yes, there are. I know Portugal is sort of a case study of net neutrality, and it's like when you log on, you have to there's all these extra fees you have to pay and stuff. I'm not an expert.
No, that's the essence of it. The big companies can charge you fees for the use of their services, in effect, like so much else in our society, making it dependent upon resources, further exacerbating what I think is something totally ignored and something of fundamental importance, the enormous gap between the wealthy and the rest of us. Who could ever have imagined that one person would be worth, $350, $400 billion, more than the GDP of most of the countries of the world? This is a science fiction nightmare come to reality.
I just got a breaking news email from the New York Times. Let's see what it is. South Korea's president is detained for questioning over martial law. Okay, that was
well, maybe that's a warning to Trump. I doubt it, but let's hope.
All right, anything else on your mind before we transition to our Q&A portion of Lichtman Live?
I think I'm ready for the Q&A and commentary. Our audience always has very smart questions and very smart things to say.
That's true. Denise Demir with a $200 donation. Holy cow. Thank you so much, Denise.
Why don't you tell them about, the housekeeping?
Oh, the housekeeping. Yeah. If you would, just go ahead and like the stream. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Turn on that notification bell so you get notifications of when we're live. Members and donations get priority for questions. Not every member, not every donation gets their question asked, but they get priority for questions. You can follow us on social media. I'm at Sammy Licht. He's at Allan Lichtman, at Allan_Lichtman on Twitter. No, on Instagram. How's that?
Great. Thank you so much for that $200 donation.
Yes.
That really helps keep us alive, as does members, of course.
Keep us afloat.
Keep us afloat. Right.
Let's get to their question.
It's a lot of work to put this on. It may not seem like it, but there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, plus a lot of effort and energy from this, old man here. Oh,
poor guy.
No, I'm fine.
How about we get to their question from Denise?
All right, let's get to it.
They say, how do you see parallels between January 6th in the U.S. and February 6th in France 1934 and their aftermaths and what we can infer for today?
I do see a lot of parallels.
What is that? I don't even know what that is. February 6th in France 1934. What is that, first off?
That is the movement towards the right-wing government that ultimately led to the Vichy pro-Nazi government in France.
Gotcha.
So I do see, much in the way of a parallel there, that January 6th also is a pathway to right-wing authoritarianism in this country.
Question from member Michael Nightwolf. They say, Professor Lichtman, do you feel that this report from Merrick Garland / Jack Smith will truly have any effect on President Trump and the beginning of his presidency?
If I were a cockeyed optimist, as the old song says, I would say it would have some effect. But being a realist and being practical, I think it will have zero effect on Trump. It's already, as Sam points out, being buried.
Yeah.
And it's going to be forgotten by the time Trump, gets inaugurated and begins to implement his policies. And, of course, it will have zero impact on Trump himself, who has no shame and doesn't believe that he should be held accountable for anything.
Member PV Kip says, what will happen when Trump takes office on day one and doesn't have the votes to pass tax cuts for the rich? Will Republicans start blaming him for it?
I don't think so. Republicans have been reluctant to blame Trump for anything, reluctant to criticize him no matter what he does or says. They justify it, including the conviction for 34 felonies, including a host of other serious indictments, including his 2 impeachments. Doesn't matter. He's impervious, and as we said, even his least qualified and most dangerous nominees are going to sail through the Republican Senate. So, no, I don't expect that.
Capitals just won. I just got an ESPN update. Capitals.
I'm sure most of our audience doesn't care, but...
How do you know?
I don't know.
You don't know?
I don't know.
Capitals.
We care. We like the Capitals.
Capitals beat the Ducks 3-0.
All right. They're on a roll.
Miles Wolf says, are Fetterman's meetings with Republicans like Hegseth and Trump a politically smart move? Should liberals be concerned?
I don't see what he gets politically out of that. It smacks to me like, the so-called liberal billionaires contributing to Trump's inauguration. And by the way, as in the past, a lot of that money is going to go right into Trump's pocket, right, Sam? By spending it on Trump's businesses and properties. So no, I don't think it's a wise move. And I think to the extent that, liberals and Democrats go on bended knee to Donald Trump, that's only going to encourage him. It's not going to moderate anything that Donald Trump does.
You have to understand, too, Fetterman is the senator from Pennsylvania. He kind of has to be this. I remember when he was first running, he was sort of a populist candidate. So maybe he sees some sort of connection between Trump and that.
I think he's not up for another 4 years. I'm not certain about that.
Yeah, because he was elected, I
think in
2022.
2022, yeah.
With that big race against
So it's not
Dr.
like he's got some immediate political interest in this.
Good point. Why does MAGA want a constitutional convention? 19 red states want a new constitution, and there is a movement trying to get 34 states, which is the necessary number. There's even an article in the New York Times about it. I haven't followed that at all.
Conservatives have been trying to do this for a very long time because they want to modify the Bill of Rights, particularly to eliminate those segments of the Bill of Rights that create a wall of separation between church and state, such as there be no religious qualifications for office holding. They want the church, in effect, to be the state. I've written about this in my forthcoming book, Conservative at the Core, A New History of American Conservatism. That's coming out pretty soon this year from University of Notre Dame Press. Conservatives like Speaker Johnson make no bones about it, that they believe that secular laws should not govern the state, but that the laws of God, as they interpret it, should be governing the state. So they want to modify the Bill of Rights to make it much easier to establish a religious dominion over the so-called secular state.
Chen Estelle says, what are your thoughts on Biden attending Trump's inauguration? I think him doing so could be perceived as normalizing a felon becoming president and undermining efforts to resist authoritarianism.
I think you make some very good points there. But I think in terms of Biden's thinking, which I understand, we had Trump obstructing Biden's ascendancy to power after the 2020 election, and he doesn't want to be seen in any way as undermining the peaceful transfer of power or the legitimacy of the 2024 election.
Yeah, it's a hard thing
call
to ask him to do. I don't think it's a hard call. I think it's a hard thing to ask him to do to
I agree.
not show up.
It's not a hard call. He should be doing it.
I know Michelle Obama said she's not going to show up.
Yeah, but, she's a private citizen.
Yeah.
She's not president of the United States.
Hey, you're right about that.
She may be someday. Who knows?
Who knows?
Anything's possible. You may be someday.
No.
I know I'm not going to be.
Anything's possible, like you said.
No.
That's not,
not me.
That's not possible.
Not possible.
Okay. J.B. Brenner says, I love the New Deal lecture you guys did. What can today's progressives learn from FDR's setbacks in his second term or his decisions to ditch Henry Wallace as his running mate for his fourth term?
Yeah. What Democrats can learn is the dangers of overreaching. Obviously, being out of power, that's not a consideration for them. FDR, as I pointed out, overreached after a huge landslide, getting over 60% of the vote, winning every state but Maine and Vermont, having two-thirds greater majority in both houses of Congress, overreached with his so-called court-packing Supreme Court plan, which even his own party members, for the most part, could not support. So what that would suggest for Democrats is that the Republicans are now going to be in danger of overreaching. Napoleon once said, never interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake. What Democrats can learn from this is let the Republicans run. Let them make their own mistakes. and they are likely to make the mistake of overreaching, as they did after they swept the midterm elections of 1994 for the first time in 40 years, gaining control of both houses of the Congress. In terms of FDR ditching Henry Wallace, historians have greatly different opinions on that.
What's your opinion?
I think it's understandable. Wallace was a controversial figure. He didn't have the support of a lot of important leaders within the Democratic Party. And it's not as if he turned to a bum. He turned to Harry Truman, who also is controversial, but is generally regarded not as a great, but at least as a near great president. Who knows what would have happened if Henry Wallace, who had a very different approach, a much more conciliatory approach to communism and the Soviet Union. Who knows what would have happened if Henry Wallace had become president? Again, it's pure speculation.
We just got a $50 donation from Melanie. Thank you so much, Melanie.
Nice.
Melanie Shaw. Can't read this last name. Melanie Shaw.
And I see we have over 2,000 viewers at the moment. That's very good.
I want to thank each and every one of you 2,000 viewers.
Yes. We are trying to keep this alive and give you
afloat. I like the word afloat.
Afloat. That's a much better word. At my age, I tend to think, in terms of being alive or not. But
no, don't do that.
A smart guy like you corrected me quite properly. But we're trying to give it to you straight from the shoulder, and you can see from a lot of these questions, we're giving you an historical. Yeah, that's my shoulder.
I'm showing them where your shoulder is.
Yeah, right there.
Yeah. We're
giving you an historical perspective that you are not going to get from most of the blah blah that you hear, in social media or in network or cable news programs.
Wow, Zero just donated $200 and said, "Thank you for being awesome, gentlemen." Well, thank you for donating.
Thank you. We greatly appreciate it.
Our next question is from Pequizit. They say, "What made you flip true the strong long-term economy key in 24 compared to 84, which was marked by both strong economical performance and staggering inequalities?"
I mean, there are lots of ways in which you can analyze the economy. I understand that. But the long-term economy was a very specific, quantitative, impartial key. And that is real per capita economic growth during the term at least equal or greater than the average of the previous two terms. There's no room there for looking at other factors or, thinking what the polls may or may not say. And in 2024, it was overwhelmingly clear. Real per capita GDP under Biden was much higher than the average of the previous two terms. There was no consideration to turn that key in any other way.
Sean Matthew says, Ron Paul suggested that the North could have bought the slaves instead of going to war during the Civil War. Would this idea have made sense or been realistic at the time?
Made no sense at the time. Northern merchants were greatly benefiting from the institution of slavery. Even though slavery was not legal in the northern states, northern capitalists were very much involved in the internal slave trade. The international slave trade was ended about in 1808, but the internal slave trade continued unabated, and northern merchants and bankers greatly benefited from that. And there was certainly no impulse whatsoever to buy up the slaves, and certainly no indication on the part of southern plantation owners that they were ready to sell their slaves. And I don't think, northern elites who had the money in any way, shape, or form wanted to bring the slave population into their communities.
Sharon Novak says, what will happen to our country if Americans don't get a grip on receiving the truth? Will this help to bring down our democracy?
I'm very worried about that. You've heard me talk about that many times. I've turned to some very important figures like the great social philosopher Hannah Arendt, the great novelist George Orwell, who warn us that once you lose truth, then democracy falls apart. If you do not establish what is real as opposed to what is fabricated, then your hold on democracy disappears. That's why Thomas Jefferson thought the most important thing for sustaining democracy was a free press, because a free press would hold power to account and debunk falsehoods and promote the truth. But unfortunately, our media institutions have fallen way short of that goal. And I'm very worried that truth is a casualty of our modern politics, and that could have catastrophic implications for the survival of our democracy. That's why we keep the show going, because we are dedicated to truth. We have our opinions as well, and we make it very clear what our opinions are, but we strive. Of course, we make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. But we strive to be as close as possible to giving you the truth.
Good work.
Thank you.
That's all I want to say.
That's all you wanted to say?
Yep.
Good enough.
Member Alex Kawa says, I'm with you on misinformation being a huge problem, but sometimes those who go against the official narrative turn out to be right. Example, Saddam Hussein not having weapons of mass destruction. Knowing that, how would you combat misinformation without infringing on the First Amendment?
Yeah, I have a whole section of my book. A book for everything,
Book for everything. A book for this, a book for that. Do you have a book for the opera?
No. That's why I tell everyone when I give a lecture, don't ask me anything about the opera.
Right.
So my book is 13 Cracks, Repairing American Democracy After Trump, and I have a whole section on how to deal with misinformation. And of course, we've talked about this. One element is much greater regulation of social media, which is not going to happen under this administration, but is still a goal to be sought after, because it may be the most important way of combating disinformation. Second thing I pointed out was we now have technology for instant fact-checking. It doesn't fact-check the more ambiguous gray areas, but it certainly would fact-check obvious fabrications, like Nancy Pelosi turned down the 10,000 National Guard troops that I ordered according to Donald Trump, or everybody wanted to see Roe versus Wade overturned, or prices have gone up 4 times under Joe Biden. All of that would be instantly detected by this new technology. And I advocate in my book that all media outlets begin to use that. So there are ways of combating disinformation, but it's not easy given, the control by billionaires of critical levers of communication in our society.
Lisa S. wants to know, is there anything in history that can show us a way to push back, especially against these billionaires like Musk running X and Zuckerberg turning course, obviously leader of Meta, which is an extremely powerful company. I mean, Meta owns Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp.
And they're now eliminating fact-checking, right?
Yeah.
So disinformation reigns. They've hired, in order to curry favor with Donald Trump, they've hired right-wingers.
But the issue is that we've never seen this type of money in the history of the world.
Not
right?
close.
So that's
not
the issue.
Even close. I mean, the best analogy would be, FDR and his New Deal reforms that did bring, to some extent, control over big money in those days, which is paltry, even adjusting for inflation, compared to big money today. I hate to say this.
Say it.
I hate to say it.
What?
It may take rock bottom. It may take a catastrophe like the Great Depression of the 1930s before our democracy can rise up again. Hate to say it, but it's possible.
That would be bad.
That would be bad.
Do you think Steve Bannon and Bernie Sanders are right about Elon Musk abusing the H-1B visa system and not giving young Americans a shot at work in the tech sector?
Yeah. Do you know what the H-1?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's bringing skilled workers
From
abroad into the country to legally work. I don't think that the program has stopped young Americans from working in the tech center. I think there are still lots of opportunities for that. But again, I'm not the world's leading expert on that. So again, I'm very careful to tell you when I have the expertise and when I don't. So that's my opinion, and take it with a grain of salt and, research it yourself.
The way I kind of see it is these tech companies, I kind of see it like how the NFL draft is. It'd be like if the tech companies could only draft players from Florida, Alabama, and Texas, right? These tech companies, they want talent from around the world. A lot of these foreign countries provide talent that is superior often to American talent. I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying how they probably, they want to pull talent from the whole world. Why not? They have the whole world at their disposal.
Yeah, Republicans claim to be the exponents of free markets, right? And free markets should cross international boundaries. That is, labor, capital, resources should be allocated according to market demand and market availability, not according to any regulations of government.
I'm not saying I agree with it or not. I'm just saying.
I'm just saying there is a contradiction
when
there.
You've got, thousands and thousands of engineers coming out of India with top marks, amazing skills in code. You know what I mean? Like, they just jump the ladder above a lot of Americans. I don't know why there's not as. I think the key
it's a meritocracy, really.
Right. I think the key to it would be to try to fix the American education system.
Well, that of course
bottom up,
is the case, and instead the American education system is being undermined and subverted, not being raised up. Because, particularly in the States, education is being dictated by politicians according to their political orthodoxy. Again, abandoning the search for truth.
Right. It's kind of like asking the NBA to not
bring in Doncic
not bring in Jokic and Doncic because they're foreign players. It's like the NBA is going to bring in right. The NBA is going to bring in the best talent they possibly can.
Well, that's free markets, which Republicans are supposed to be the great exponents of. Of course, they violate it all the time, like with Trump's proposed tariffs.
Right. Comic Fan says, what's your thoughts on Elon Musk endorsing Germany's AfD party and the British government accusing Elon Musk of disinformation?
It's chilling that Elon Musk, who has the power to do so because he's so wealthy, is not only trying to move America sharply to the right, but trying to move our allies sharply to the right as well. I find that incredibly disturbing, incredibly chilling, and it's kind of an insight to who Elon Musk really is. And I'm all for, the British government cracking down on disinformation from Elon Musk. And the disinformation didn't stop with the election, as a number of media outlets have pointed out. When Elon Musk, who's been elected to nothing, jumped in to kill the bipartisan agreement on the debt ceiling, he did so by issuing, once again, a fount of disinformation.
He's also issued a fount of disinformation about the LA fires, too. So people need to be aware
Absolutely,
of that
as has Trump, of course.
Well, of course.
Yeah.
Should you change the keys to include disinformation, how people feel about the economy, and make their messaging good?
I'm seriously, as I've said right away, I'm seriously looking at a reevaluation of the keys. It's not an easy thing to do, to change a system that's worked for 42 years on the basis of one election where it didn't work. But those are reasonable suggestions, which I'm looking at, I've got 3 years plus to make these evaluations. And then, of course, I'm going to turn it all over to Sam anyway.
You are?
Yeah, right.
What do I know about anything?
A lot.
I do?
Sure.
Name 3 things I know about.
You've been sitting here next to me. You
That's
must have
true.
learned something.
I've heard a lot. That is true.
All right, let's move on. We're getting close to time.
About 10 minutes left.
Okay, cool. I can take a whole bunch more questions.
A whole bunch?
A whole bunch. By the way, we had a great time today.
Yes.
Yeah.
You want to tell him where you went?
Universal.
You went to Universal Studios Hollywood, and he had a great time.
Great time. I thought it would just be a mundane, amusement park. It's not. It was really very, very well done, very imaginative, very exciting.
So you never know what you're going to get on Lichtman Live. You
never know.
Politics, and you get a quick review of Universal Studios Hollywood.
Right. Plus, Sam and I have been training, right? We've been running.
Yeah.
And
I'm slow, though.
I'm getting ready for July, the Senior Olympics.
There you go.
And you're getting ready. You can do some more triathlons, right?
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And our mom is getting ready to...
Not our mom.
Your mom,
My
right.
mom.
Your mom.
Not
Sorry.
our mom.
Yes, your mom.
Yes.
My wife is getting ready to set world records in the Senior Olympics in swimming.
Nice.
I'm not setting any world records, but I'm glad to be participating.
Yeah. All right, you ready for the next question?
I'm always ready.
Did you know there were some white Southerners that didn't accept the results of the American Civil War and immigrated to Brazil, the only country slavery was still legal, and founded a town called Americana in the state of Sao Paulo?
Yes,
You knew that?
I did.
No, you didn't.
I did.
Be
Come
honest.
on.
I didn't know that.
Well, just because you didn't know that didn't mean Lots of white Southerners didn't accept the results of the Civil War. To this day, they haven't accepted the results of the Civil War. There's this whole Southern, re-evaluation of the Civil War. And even, white supremacists claiming that blacks were better off under slavery than they were back in Africa, or were better off under slavery than white wage workers in free states. And we saw, I think Hegseth said he wanted to restore Confederate names to American military bases.
So why?
Why? The Confederacy was established on one thing and one thing only, not states' rights, but slavery. In fact, it was the Constitution that was least favorable that one could construct to states' rights. It forbid any state within the Confederate States of America from doing anything on its own to undermine the institution of slavery. And the notion that we should honor in any way the Confederates, whose objective was to preserve this horrific violation of human rights, it's just reprehensible. We've seen that in the curriculum that the state, I think the state of Florida adopted, and other states, which seek to whitewash the institution of slavery. It's just reprehensible.
So I just looked it up. Hegseth was born and grew up in Minneapolis. What the hell does he care about Confederate? He's not even from the South. Like, it doesn't make any sense.
It's not just those from the South.
Obviously.
It's broadly spread in the American conservative movement that somehow the Confederate cause was a noble cause that should be honored even to this day.
Andrew Carlson says, Professor, considering Trump and Nixon's actions, some argue Republicans lean towards authoritarian tendencies. Is it fair to view this as tolerating authoritarianism as an acceptable ideology?
There's no question the Republicans are leaning towards authoritarianism. Who's their model? What foreign ruler is their model for what they want to do in the United States?
Viktor Orban from Hungary.
Right, who has essentially snuffed out the political opposition and killed the free press, turned it into a Russian-type, state sponsored press, even informally. And this is not acceptable. You know, it is the antithesis of what this nation has stood for, and that is the sovereignty of the people, democratic principles, protection of everyone's rights, free speech, not controlled by the government, a vigorous political debate with different points of view, a recognition of legitimate opposition, and as I've said so many times,
say it again.
Democracy, respect for human rights, is almost non-existent throughout the great sweep of human history. Throughout most of recorded history, governments have been ruled by heredity, divine right, or by violence, by conquest. We didn't get the golden age of democracy until the 20th century, till after World War I, when we got about 24 democracies out of almost nothing. That was cut in half by the 1940s or more. You got a new golden age of democracy in the late 20th century, and there has been nothing but a steady decline in the 21st century. The Economist magazine that tracks democratic progress around the world has found that fewer than 10% of the world's peoples today live in fully functioning democracies. We're reverting back, sadly, to a period in which people's sovereignty was not the ruling principle, and in which human civil rights and civil liberties were not respected.
Brian Peppard says, history question. Which former president do you think is most similar to Trump? Which former president do you think is most similar to Biden?
Oh, no question, Nixon.
For Trump?
Is the president most similar to Trump. Like Trump, he was a president who sought to undermine our democratic institutions in order to seize and maintain power for himself and his political allies. Like Trump, he, in my view, committed some very serious crimes and would have been held accountable for them, but for the fact that what happened that kept Nixon from being held accountable, Sam.
He got pardoned.
He got pardoned, for, prospectively and retrospectively by Gerald Ford. I'm not saying that was the wrong thing. Ford kind of had to do that, or his entire presidency would have been caught up with the trials of Richard Nixon. It was the right thing for President Ford, the wrong thing for the nation and accountability. Probably the closest analog to Biden would be George H.W. Bush, another one-term president who had a lot of accomplishments. He really presided over the fall of the Berlin Wall, the collapse of the Iron Curtain, the end of the Soviet Union, and got very little credit for any of accomplishments because, like Biden, he really never got his message across to the American people.
But politically, they're pretty different.
Yeah, but in terms of the nature of their presidency,
right.
I think what's being asked. Politically, Biden was pretty much the same as Barack Obama. Not much different. Remember, he was Obama's vice president.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
I forgot.
People forget that.
Yeah. Who would you pick as your vice president?
You.
Oh, thanks. If you could revive any dead American presidents, who would you choose and why?
Well, my favorite president is Franklin Roosevelt, who led us through two of the greatest tragedies in world history, the Great Depression of the 1930s and the world's most destructive war, World War II. And unlike a lot of modern Democratic presidents, he understood that he was not only a policymaker and a leader, but a party builder. And he was instrumental in building the modern Democratic Party, the so-called Roosevelt Coalition that he put together, dominated American politics for 2 or 3 decades and is still an influential force in our politics.
All right, we are getting to an hour. How many more questions do you want? We're at
3.
3.
3.
Would you rate Joe Biden as a superior, A, B, C, D, or F if you were to rate him on a tier list?
Yeah. I'm always asked this question, and I'm not dodging it, but I always...
Go ahead, dodge it.
I'm going to sort of dodge it. I always invoke the Zen mantra, unask the question.
Right.
You will not know the legacy of a president for many years thereafter. Presidents often are fundamentally reevaluated. Two examples are Harry Truman and Dwight Eisenhower, who were very lightly regarded in their time, but eventually came to be praised by most authorities as near great presidents. So till we see the ultimate outcome of a lot of Biden's initiatives, very hard to rate him, but I would rate him a B. Some major accomplishments. It was Biden and Biden alone who put together the coalition of the West that stopped Putin from quickly conquering Ukraine and threatening our NATO allies. And he had more domestic accomplishments than any president since the 1960s. But, as I said, like H.W. Bush, he never got his message across. He was never recognized for what he did. He was a one-term president. And like Bush, the opposition party took power after his one term.
Remember, Valerie Hostin says, could you please do a critical analysis on some Democratic states, such as California, Oregon, Washington, and some of the northeastern Democratic states joining Canada? Canada already has what most Democrats say they want. It would get those states out from under the Electoral College.
I think that would be a really bad idea.
I'd say the chances of that happening are
It's not going to happen anyway, but it's a really bad idea because it would leave our country in total control of the red states.
Final question of the night from
Yes.
Joseph. They say, can we stop Trump from suing the media every time they print something he doesn't like?
No. Trump can issue as many lawsuits as he wants. Doesn't mean they have merit. Doesn't mean they're going to survive. But what you can do is, help out media outlets or others under attack from Donald Trump. If you're a lawyer, offer your services, make donations to defense funds. But you can't stop him from filing lawsuits. Donald Trump is the lawsuit king, involved in as plaintiff or defendant in thousands upon thousands of lawsuits.
All right, with that, we will wrap it up. We'll wrap it up with this donation from Colored Duck. They say, every time I watch your show, I ask more questions. Thanks for engaging my curiosity, and thanks for your dedication to informing viewers.
That's what we try to do.
Thank you, sir.
On this show. We are believers in truth, and we endeavor to give you the truth. Doesn't mean we don't make mistakes. Doesn't mean we can't be wrong. We're human beings. But what is important is our dedication to the truth and to giving you in-depth kind of responses to your questions, which also look at not just what's happening today, but historical precedents, historical information that helps us to understand our current situation. Long as you keep supporting us, we're going to keep doing that. Thank you.
That was a good ending. You want to just end with that?
Yes.
We're ending. Good night.